Hi all, it's Joe from 4 on 5, and today we're doing another 10-year review where I rewatch a film I haven't seen in 10 years. I'm going back through to see what I remember, if my opinion has changed, and how the film has held up over time. Today we're talking about one of the great masterpieces to come out of Hollywood. This film was made way back when Marilyn Monroe was just a 13-year-old girl named Norma Jean, and the movie business was dominated by the 5 major studios of Warner Brothers, MGM, RKO, Paramount, and 20th Century Fox. But it was MGM that brought today's film to fruition, and that film is The Wizard of Oz, based on the children's book by L. Frank Baum. Now, I know this film has been talked about to death, but I feel that I have something the other videos don't have.
Courage!
No, I was thinking more along the lines of sources. See, when I was in Manhattan the other day, I picked up for $5 a book by Algene Harmez, which is The Making of Wizard of Oz, which rekindled my interest in the film and its standing in Hollywood history. The book encouraged me to rewatch the film with a new behind-the-scenes knowledge, and I wanted to take the time to properly review the picture, but also give us spark notes on the book. So here we are. The Wizard of Oz, starring the likes of Judy Garland, Ray Bolger, Jack Haley, Burt Lahr, and Margaret Hamilton, has captivated audiences for 84 years and shows no signs of letting up. We have a new 2-part film coming out in 2024 based on the play Wicked, starring none other than Ariana Grande. But what is it about this film? Why is it such a classic, and why does it continue to inspire new works and adaptations? Today we'll review the film and give our thoughts on the plot, set design, and music, but also provide you with some behind-the-scenes knowledge of the production, which is just as interesting as you could hope. We'll also discuss how Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West, caught fire and was hospitalized, the unfounded allegations against the actors who played the Munchkins, and the other notorious stories that went on set. So upon watching this film again, I realized I remembered it incredibly well, in part because it was one I saw often in my childhood on ABC Family, which is now called Freeform. It seemed as though the film was always being broadcast on TV, and I can still vividly recall hiding under the dining table and peering around a chair at the screen while Margaret Hamilton cackled and cavorted as the Wicked Witch of the West. She scared the life out of me, but at the same time there was something arresting about her performance, so genuine that one could almost believe the actress too was a witch. She was like a snake charmer and a snake rolled into one. And meanwhile, Judy Garland's earnestness and the arresting soundtrack are forever ingrained in my mind, and I know I could play back this whole film in my head just by sitting back and closing my eyes. So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that the story of The Wizard of Oz follows Dorothy Gale of Kansas, played by Judy Garland, and her Karen Terrier Toto being swept up in a cyclone and being taken from the sepia-toned USA to the full-color world of Oz, where she meets 3 companions, a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion.
Put 'em up! Put 'em up!
Together they journey to the Emerald City to see the wizard, to bestow upon them a brain, a heart, the nerve, and a ride home, respectively. Along the way they are dogged by the Wicked Witch and her flying monkey goons, and they must take the power of friendship, optimism, and good manners to make it to their destination. As with most great children's films, we have Walt Disney to thank, in part, for the existence of The Wizard of Oz. It was his animated classic Snow White in 1937 that caused the other studios to frantically search for another fantasy property to adapt into a motion picture. Louis B. Mayer, whose name made up the last M in MGM, was encouraged to buy the rights to Baum's book in 1938 for a total of $75,000, which would be about $1.5 million in 2023 money. Mayer assigned producer Mervyn LeRoy to work on the picture, and an up-and-comer in the studio's ranks, Arthur Freed, to be his assistant. The script was worked on at various times by some 10 people, but only a final 3 saw their names on the film: Noel Langley, Edgar Allan Wolfe, and Florence Ryerson. Langley, though, was largely the architect of the script, and was responsible for many elements, including having the 3 friends Dorothy makes in Oz first appear as farmhands in Kansas. He said, quote, "You cannot put fantastic people in strange places in front of an audience unless they have seen them as human beings first." This is much the same wisdom that would lead to the creation of other characters like Luke Skywalker, a human element that serves as your guide into a fantastical world. As with the screenwriters, there were several directors assigned to this picture, but the one who left the largest mark was Victor Fleming, who did Gone with the Wind that same year. Perhaps it is the shuffling of the director's chair that leads to some interesting camera work, but notably this kind of jarring pan through the set when Dorothy first enters Oz just feels so strange. It's an odd way to showcase a fantastical land. Diving right into the plastic foliage? You would expect them to shoot Dorothy from, say, a rooftop of Munchkinland, but I digress. Fleming directs the film with an old Hollywood flair and style, and I'm not going to fault him for one odd pan shot. In watching this film again, I found the plot to be exceptionally well-paced and succinct. If you've ever read Baum's book, there's quite a bit of fluff that didn't make it into the film, and the reworking and omissions all ultimately lead to a better story on screen. The witch became a constant, looming off-screen threat as opposed to an abstract one, and there was real tension and stakes in the character's journey as a result. Additionally, the natural flow of the dialogue to music created a sense of continuity, and Oz was only the fourth film to work on such a formula. To create what was called an integrated score was a task assigned to Yip Harburg, the lyricist, and Harold Arlen, the composer. Each man had a unique approach to working. For Arlen, he believed the best way to find a melody would be when he was anywhere but at a desk, in a store, golfing, walking, driving. He would write down the melodies that came into his head and perfect them later. Harburg, meanwhile, would listen to the compositions over and over until words formed. If they didn't form, he'd go out and plant something in his garden until the muse came to him. The pair worked on what they called the lemon drop songs first, the ding dong, the witch is dead type numbers that were whimsical and had a lot to do with rhyming. The classic Over the Rainbow would come later, and was almost removed from the final film by studio head Mayer, but the protests from the songwriter, composer, and producer were such that Mayer relented and left it in. Perhaps the most captivating aspect of the film is the performances. Aside from Dorothy herself, each of her companions is instantly notable. Ray Bolger's Scarecrow, Jack Haley's Tin Man, and Bert Lahr's Cowardly Lion. Now, putting aside Bolger's performance, as wondrous as it may be, there is something very interesting going on with the Tin Man and the Lion as seen through an adult lens. The actor behind the Tin Man, Jack Haley, has said the voice that he used for the character was the one he would use to read to his children. As an aside, one of those children, Jack Jr., was married to Liza Minnelli for a time, Judy Garland's daughter. Now, reading to your children with a certain voice is fine and dandy, but there is an undeniably effeminate and potentially coded way to read Haley's portrayal, intentionally or not. Consider this line.
Love and art.
With Hollywood's refusal to feature LGBTQ characters for much of its history, there are still instances where representation eked past the Catholic-inspired Hays Code, censors, and the studios. Just consider Peter Lorre as Joel Cairo in The Maltese Falcon. And while I can find no evidence to support that Haley's performance was coded in any way, the text of the film is there, open for audience interpretation. For the time, there's something very subversive about what Haley is doing. The subversion continues with Bert Lahr's Cowardly Lion, whose broad song and dance numbers also point to a coded performance. This could be the result of Lahr's extensive background in burlesque and vaudeville, but what 1939 audiences may have read as campy, a modern viewer can interpret as something else entirely. Both Lahr and Haley, perhaps unintentionally, call into question gender constructs and provide a challenge to the views of the time by giving performances that are surprisingly complex takes on the quote, man characters. Elsewhere on the cast, you have the good and bad witches, Glinda, played by Billie Burke, and the Wicked Witch of the West, played by Margaret Hamilton. To really build up the stark differences between these two characters, Margaret Hamilton recalls the studio giving Billie Burke a lavish pink dressing room, with all the amenities you could ask for. Hamilton, by contrast, got scarcely more than a pup tent, a shabby, derelict little room in which she could get ready for the part. Both actresses hit their performances out of the park. I remember seeing Burke in a Bette Davis film, The Man Who Came to Dinner, which came out 3 years after Oz. In that film, she plays a mousy and easily intimidated housewife, so it's nice to see her as the laid-back and assured Glinda here. By contrast, Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch of the West is completely unhinged, screeching and cavorting her way through dialogue with a fervor that largely defined what a witch was for future performances to reference. She's perfectly menacing, unnerving, and frightening, and yet outside of the part, she was a kind and conscientious woman from the Midwest. Later in life, she appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to give a human face to the witch persona, in an effort to show children a look behind the curtain on one of their nightmares and how something scary isn't so bad if you analyze it. Hamilton can still do the witch voice and persona so many years later.
Well, she talked like this. It's very nice to see you.
Though it feels at odds with the half-zipped sweater surrounding a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Still, she turned in an iconic performance during the film and definitely did it on his show as well. Frank Morgan rounds out the cast as the eponymous wizard, and also plays other bit parts in the film along the way, including the guard to Oz. Morgan was known to like his alcohol, and during the scene where our heroes arrive at the gate, one person on set remarked that it was good he was in the guard booth, otherwise he would have likely fallen over. I think Morgan does well as the wizard, but I mainly want to draw attention to his cheeks.
Wow!
Aside from the cast, another hallmark of The Wizard of Oz is the music. The orchestra that featured on the Oz soundtrack had some 90 instruments, which at the time was an enormous sum, as most orchestras capped out at 50. The resulting music is sweeping, lush, and intricately detailed. Much like a Broadway play, the themes of the various characters and scenes feature in little snippets throughout the overture, and you would be hard-pressed to find a more commanding score, much less one that won the Academy Award. The most daring track from the picture is, of course, Over the Rainbow, in dual part due to Judy Garland's shimmering vocals and the simple yet enduring lyrics. Watching the film again, I couldn't help but be taken with the tragedy of Garland, who in this picture was only 16 but had already faced ample Hollywood abuse and bullying over her appearance. Yet there is such an earnestness and professionalism that her castmates vouch for, and you can see that all in this film. She is selling every note, look, and physical movement. The film would not work as well without her in it. On this viewing of the film, I have to admit the set design looks worse, in part due to the higher quality of the resolution on this watch. Yet it is still fascinating that in 1939 they could so brilliantly blend matte painting backgrounds with organic sets. The overlay of footage, such as the yellow brick road facing the Emerald City after the poppy field, remains impressive to this day. The running around the witch's castle also looks stunning, creating the illusion of a much larger space. And who can forget the cyclone, which the special effects team worked tirelessly to create a 35-foot high structure that swayed and moved appropriately behind the miniature design of the Gale family farm. Unfortunately, the first design didn't work out, so the design of the cyclone seen on screen is actually the second try, which cost the studio a bit of money to correct, but MGM's coffers was hardly lacking at the time. Taking my rewatch of the film as a whole, I can't help but feel how impossible it is to separate this movie from its legacy, and part of that legacy is the behind-the-scenes stories. The first concerns Margaret Hamilton, who plays the Wicked Witch of the West. In her exit from Munchkinland in a cloud of red smoke, the actress was to shoot down a relatively narrow shaft into the floor, and a gust of fire and smoke would take her place. Interestingly, the production nailed it after the first take, but the director Victor Fleming wanted to have additional coverage. And it was on one of the subsequent attempts on the scene that something went wrong and the fire came much too early, literally burning skin off Margaret Hamilton's body. She was hospitalized and out for weeks recovering. While she was recovering, her stunt double Betty Danko was made to film the scene where the witch rides her broom to ride out Surrender Dorothy above the Emerald City. The conduit they stuck to the bottom of the broom to puff out smoke caught fire, causing Danko to fall off the broom and be strung upside down until they could lower the rig. Still, a third actress was brought in to film the scene, and also had issues with poor pyrotechnics. Hamilton recounts that the production tried to get her back doing the scenes, but she wanted nothing to do with fire for the remainder of the shoot, and for good reason. The second mishap of note occurred at the start of the picture, with the original actor who was to play the Tin Man, Buddy Ebsen, who went on to do the Beverly Hillbillies. The Tin Man costume makeup was aluminum dust, which Ebsen inhaled while playing the part, which sent him to the hospital, as the aluminum coated his lungs and made it impossible to breathe. At the time, the crew was flabbergasted, as coal miners were given aluminum to inhale to protect their lungs, and medical knowledge at the time did not deem it hazardous. Still, when Jack Haley was brought on to replace Ebsen, the powdered aluminum was ditched for a liquid mixture, in hopes it would not be inhaled. Capping off the behind-the-scenes drama is the alleged debauchery of the actors who played the Munchkins. Producers and others involved in the picture put forth stories that the actors were big partiers, drinkers, and philanderers who tore apart the hotel. Yet, there is really no basis for these tall tales, and they seem to be the direct result of prejudice. Few, if any, of the actors got into any real mischief, with only one of the 124 having a domestic dispute that was solved by moving hotels. The stories of drinking and wild parties that have permeated the culture around the movie are all a bunch of hooey, and it's about time they were scrubbed from the record. Overall, watching The Wizard of Oz again was a nice little trip down memory lane. Its enduring popularity is difficult to pinpoint, but the soundtrack, in particular Over the Rainbow, coupled with the tragedy of Judy Garland's passing, made the project a crucial part of film history. The film features Garland before the system tore her down, before the world put its full weight upon her shoulders. Should you want to check out the film again or for the first time, really pay attention to what Garland is doing with her mannerisms and earnest yet yearning facial expressions. You buy every single minute that she's on screen, and she's just so desperately trying to get home. For many Oz fans, the television broadcasts on CBS and NBC have helped generation after generation discover the Yellow Brick Road, and it's to these broadcasts that I also owe my fandom. It is also incredibly helpful to the Oz legacy, and this is going to sound silly, that the majority of the film is in color, as modern audiences seem to have no patience for sepia or black and white. A survey done in 2017 found that 30% of young people hadn't watched a black and white movie all the way through, which seems a cautious figure that has likely gotten worse with time. While concrete reasons can be found to describe the film's indelible hold on popular culture, there is still something you can't quite put your finger on that is just out of reach. You could say this film has just a little bit of magic. This has been another 4 on 5 10-year review. If you liked this video, please let me know what you thought in the comments so we can keep the discussion going.